In tonight's news edition, after talks with His Majesty, the UN General Assembly President says much more money is needed to help host countries deal with influx of Syrian refugees. Jordan condemns a deadly attack by armed militants on a university in northwestern Pakistan and expresses solidarity with Islamabad in the fight against terror groups. And Israel's plan to appropriate agricultural land in the occupied West Bank draws Palestinian anger. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. His Majesty the King discussed with President of the UN General Assembly, Mogens Lukatoft, the role of the world body and its organizations in dealing with the Syrian refugee crisis. Jordan is bearing growing burdens for hosting over 1,300,000 Syrians. King Abdullah said Jordan appreciated UN agencies for the support to alleviate the pressure on the kingdom, resulting from the provision of humanitarian and relief services to the displaced Syrians. The meeting held at Al Husseiniya Palace and attended by the royal court chief and the foreign minister also dealt with other regional conflicts, including the situation in Iraq and the war on terrorism and extremism. Lukatoft said the UN organizations will continue to extend aid to Jordan to help it address the Syrian refugee crisis and achieve sustainable development. During a visit to the Zaatri refugee camp in northern Jordan, the president of the UN General Assembly said more attention must be given to the Syrian refugee crisis. Mogens Lukatoft said he wanted to experience and assess the needs of refugees for himself. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees said earlier that Jordan is currently host to more than 630,000 registered Syrian refugees, putting a huge strain on the kingdom's natural resources, infrastructure and economy. The UNHCR added that while almost 110,000 Syrians currently live in Zaatri and the country's other main camp in Azraq, the vast majority are struggling to survive in towns and cities across Jordan. Lukatoft said much more money was needed to help host countries' needs with the influx and said he was hopeful that a donors conference due to take place in London next month would raise some funds. The office of the UNHCR said the number of Syrians trying to enter Jordan has jumped to 12,000 from 4,000 in recent weeks.
My visit is, of course, to get better knowledge of the size of the problems and how they're dealt with in order to raise more international awareness and more international support, both for the refugees and for the host countries, which are so heavily burdened financially by the movement of refugees. There is this conference in London on Syria in particular. Next month there is a resettlement conference taking place in Geneva in March. We will have the large humanitarian summit in Istanbul, Turkey in May. And all these events will be a chain of events that should raise, like visits like this should, the awareness in the international community that we need to provide overall actually $15 billion more each year.
His Majesty the King condemned a terrorist attack that targeted Bucha Khan University in the Pakistani city of Charsada and killed or injured a number of innocent civilians. In a cable to Pakistani President Mamnoon Hussain, King Abdullah said Jordan stood by the Islamic Republic of Pakistan in combating these cowardly criminal acts and wishing the injured a speedy recovery. Minister of State for Media Affairs Mohammed al-Momani said Jordan condemns and regrets such cowardly acts, reaffirming Jordan's constant position in fighting terrorism wherever it happens. Momani warned of the spread of terrorism that intimidates the innocent, stressing that it is the duty of all countries to stand against it and root it out. Armed militants stormed the university in volatile northwestern Pakistan, killing at least 20 people and wounding dozens. It came a little more than a year after the massacre of 134 students at a school in the same area. A senior Pakistani Taliban commander claimed responsibility for the attack. Here's more.
At least 19 people were killed when a group of militants attacked a university in northwestern Pakistan. Police say a group of armed men scaled the walls of the Bacha Khan University in Charsada under the cover of thick fog. They opened fire on students and teachers in classrooms and hostels. Anxious parents consoled each other while awaiting news. One student described the mayhem. There was so much panic and fear. A friend of mine jumped from the building, he said. We saw the militants chanting, "Allah is great." The injured were rushed to a hospital for treatment. The university was preparing to host a poetry recital later in the day to commemorate the death of an ethnic Pashtun activist after whom the university is named. It has nearly 3,000 students, but an additional 600 were present for the recital. The Pakistan Taliban have claimed responsibility for the attack.
The general coordinator of the Syrian opposition committee, Riyad Hijab, said the committee would not attend next week's peace negotiations with the government if a third group takes part. Hijab, who spoke at a news conference in the Saudi capital Riyadh, was referring to Russia's bid to widen the opposition's team. He also announced opposition figures that would negotiate on behalf of the opposition in any talks. Earlier, the United Nations said it would not issue invitations to peace talks between Syria's government and opposition set to begin on January 25th until major powers pushing the peace process to reach an agreement on which rebel representatives should attend. Russia and the United States said the talks should start this month as planned. Speaking after a meeting, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry in Switzerland, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said neither of them had thought about seeking a postponement of the talks. Lavrov said various dates were being mooted, but the final decision was for the UN Secretary General on the advice of his special envoy for Syria, Staffan de Mistura. Lavrov said Russia, the U.S., and other parties supporting the Syrian talks would not take part in the negotiations. U.S. Defense Secretary Ash Carter said the United States called for defense ministers from all 26 nations participating in the coalition against Daesh, as well as Iraq, to gather in Brussels in 3 weeks' time. This came at a joint news conference in Paris with French Defense Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian. Both ministers, along with their counterparts from Britain, Australia, Italy, and Germany, met earlier in the day to examine ways to build on gains made against Daesh, including increasing the number of police and army trainers. Carter said that ministers agreed that the coalition had to do more to eradicate the group.
We agreed that we all must do more. I believe today's discussion gave every minister the opportunity to discuss with their governments what else they can bring to the table and how they can better align their efforts with our common goals and strategy.
Syrian forces clashed with Daesh terrorists in the eastern city of Deir el-Zur. The Britain-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said the group is in control of most of Deir el-Zur province, while the government is holding parts of the city, including a military airport. The monitoring group said the fighting came as the group released 270 of an estimated 400 civilians, most of them women and children, kidnapped over the weekend. But the released civilians will remain in Daesh-held villages in the province. The monitoring group also said that Daesh rounded up another 50 men during raids on houses in areas seized during 4 days of fighting in the city. The United Nations has warned that around 200,000 besieged residents in Deir el-Zur face severe food shortage. Border guards foiled an infiltration attempt by a man who tried to cross from Iraq into Jordan. A statement by the Jordan Armed Forces Arab Army said troops applying the rules of engagement in such cases arrested the infiltrator and referred him to the concerned authorities. In their humanitarian task, meanwhile, the border guard received 58 Syrian refugees in the past 24 hours. An army source said the guards provided the refugees with necessary aid before transferring them to refugee camps. Jordan Royal Medical Services personnel also treated ill refugees at medical facilities based on the frontier. Israel plans to appropriate a large tract of agricultural land in the occupied West Bank. The new land grab reported by Israel Radio has angered Palestinians and is almost certain to draw international criticism. The report said the land covering 154 hectares was in the fertile Jordan Valley, close to Jericho, an area where the occupation authorities already have many settlement farms built on occupied Palestinian land. The report comes at a time of increased international condemnation of settlement policy. Chief Palestinian negotiator Saeb Ariqat called on the international community to support the Palestinians in their bid to bring the issue to the UN Security Council.
Contacting the international community, the Americans, the Europeans, others in the international community. We're consulting with them because I think we should go to the Security Council with a resolution only and solely for the colonial settlement enterprise. That's what we need to do, and we hope that those who tell us not to go to the Security Council to tell us. If we can tell us, we ask you to stop settlements, you ask them to stop settlements, they're not listening to you. They're not listening to Obama, they're not listening to Kerry, they're not listening to Merkel, they're not listening to anyone. So please, when we approach the Security Council with a resolution concerning settlement activities, don't stop us. We're the victims here.
Yesterday, U.S. State Department spokesman John Kirby reiterated Washington's opposition to Israel's settlement building, which usually begins with land seizures. Haget Ofran, a member of the anti-settlement peace group, said that unlike previous Israeli governments that largely avoided the seizures, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has carried out several appropriations during his time in office. She described the move as a catastrophe.
Unlike previous governments, this government is allowing the expropriation of more lands in the West Bank to expand the settlements. We see this policy as a catastrophe that is meant to destroy the possibility for a two-state solution and to de facto annex Area C to Israel.
Saudi Arabia's King Salman and Chinese President Xi Jinping attended a ceremony to launch a major new joint venture refinery. The Yanbu Aramco Sinopco Refinement Corporation is a joint venture between Saudi Aramco and Chinese Sinopec. The 400,000 barrels per day refinery is expected to weigh on diesel prices as the rise in supply will far outweigh demand, which has been sluggish because of weak economic growth. It is the second refinery to start up in Saudi Arabia in the past 2 years and will complete state company Saudi Aramco's transformation into a leading exporter of diesel. His Majesty the King's military advisor, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mish'al al-Zaban, met with commander of the U.S. Central Command, General Lloyd Austin, and accompanying delegation. The meeting, attended by His Royal Highness Prince Faisal and the U.S. Ambassador and Defense Attaché, dealt with ties between the Jordanian and U.S. militaries as well as developments in the Middle East. Germany said it cannot take in all the asylum seekers who want to begin a new life there, as it is not unethical of Berlin to limit the influx. President Joachim Gauck pressed other European countries to share the burden. Gauck did not advocate such drastic action, but said a policy of limiting the inflow of refugees could be morally and politically necessary to allow the state to cope. Many German local authorities say they are struggling to cope with the influx. Pressure is mounting on Chancellor Angela Merkel to reverse her open-door policy and even close the country's borders to new arrivals. Merkel has vowed to measurably reduce arrivals this year, but has refused to introduce a cap, saying it would be impossible to enforce without closing German borders. World number one Novak Djokovic gave French teenager Quentin Halys a free tennis lesson for about an hour before the wild card showed how much he had learned in the Serb's 6-1, 6-2, 7-6 Australian Open second round win in Melbourne. Djokovic was at his clinical efficient best in the first two sets as he looked to be tactically 3 shots ahead of Halys, and he opened up space on court at will while he romped to lead inside an hour. Djokovic, who's aiming for a record-equaling 6th Australian Open title, will next face either Italy's Andrea Seppi or American Denis Kudla in the third round. Women's number 4 seed Agnieszka Radwanska from Poland disposed of Canada's Eugene Bouchard 6-4, 6-2 and faces Puerto Rico's Monica Puig in the third round. Bouchard lost 6 straight games to gift the set and an early break in the second to the Polish 4th seed and was then powerless to mount a challenge. And finally, it will continue to be cold tonight across many regions, with frost formation expected after midnight, especially in the kingdom's north. Tomorrow, temperatures will further dip with southwesterly moderate to gusty winds. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect relatively cool conditions with northerly moderate winds and calm seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To end the news, here's a reminder of our top stories. After talks with His Majesty, the UN General Assembly President says much more money is needed to help host countries deal with influx of Syrian refugees. Jordan condemns a deadly attack by armed militants on a university in northwestern Pakistan and expresses solidarity with Islamabad in the fight against terror groups. And Israel plans to appropriate agricultural land in the occupied West Bank, draws Palestinian anger. With that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Nancy Khair. Thank you for watching and have a good night.